Hello and welcome to our weekly Shiur on the Parsha with the commentary of the Alshich and often others too, but Be'ikar, the Alshich HaKodesh. And this week's Shiur is dedicated to the Refuah Shalema of Harav Chaim Lipa Zev Ben Chana. Chaim Lipa Zev Ben Chana. He should have a complete Refuah Shalema with the Hera. If you'd like to dedicate this Alshich Shiur, this weekly Alshich Shiur, to somebody you love, to celebrate, let's concentrate on the positive, to celebrate Simcha Bar Mitzvah, Chasna, or of course, indeed, for somebody's memory, or for Refuah Shalema, then please email me at yy@rabbiyyy.com, yy@rabbiyyy.com, and of course, as always, we will dedicate the Shiur for the name that you supply. This week's Parsha is the Parsha in which HaShem speaks to Avraham Avinu for the first time. Lech, Lecho, leave your father's house, etc., and go to the land of Israel. It's therefore the first incidence of Avram's prophecy, and indeed the first test of Avraham Avinu to leave his father alone and to go. And remember, leaving his father alone is to leave him for 60 years, to desert, abandon your father, and go to the land of Israel. That is therefore an extraordinarily significant parsha. This is a milestone, in fact, the creation of the Jewish people, the first step in the creation of a distinct and different path for the whole of humanity, which is going to be one which will lead them, hopefully, back to undo the damage that was created right by Adam Rishon through the agency of a people who are seen as a priestly nation, whose role is to be an inspiration and to take humanity in the direction that they've left from back to HaShem. Okay. Now, because of the first Nevi'us, we have to bear in mind exactly, I think, therefore, how Nevi'us works. Because it just having been told in the previous Seder at the end of Noach that his father Terach had 3 sons, what was called Avram, not Avraham yet, Avram. That's all we get. That's all the Torah gives us the tiniest glimpse of the existence of such a person. And I think it's important maybe just to interject here that don't forget that the Torah only gives you a sketch, only gives you the briefest sketch of the lives of all of the Avos and Imahas. I've just finished a book on the lives of the Imahas and the great Tzaddik Noshim women, Tzadkanias, the great saintly women of Tanakh. I had to dig very, very deep to find exactly what their story was, because the story of neither their husbands or them is told in any significant detail at all in the Psukim. So you have to dig deep to find this. So the first mention of Avraham Avinu is that he's born. There's a hint of something called Ur Kasdim, which the Talmud fills in the detail in the Medrash about. That's the famous place where he was put on trial and condemned to be burned alive for his belief in God. But none of that's in the Chumash. The first time we see Avraham Avinu is this week's Seder, emerging, a Lech, Lecho, truly like a chrysalis, emerging from growth, spiritual growth, to become a Novi. If Hashem speaks to you, you're a prophet. But how does that work? Now, to get a glimpse of Avraham Avinu, to try and fill in some of the color in this sketch, we have to remind ourselves what the Rambam says about how a person becomes a Novi. So the Rambam in the Halakha is called Yesodei Torah. It's the beginning of his Mishnah Torah. In the 7th parak, so the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah says the following thing: Yesodei Hadas, it's a fundamental of Jewish belief, Leda, to know, that Hashem prophesies, in other words, speaks directly to human beings. But not just any human being. And this is the critical bit when we're bearing in mind Avraham Avinu. But only the existence of the prophetic process only occurs to somebody who's a Chochem Godel, somebody who's extraordinarily great in wisdom, right? So you can't have a stupid prophet. I'm just switching off my phone, which rang in the middle there. I should have done that. Very unprofessional. Hopefully we'll give silence during the share. I must warn you that we're having construction done in our house at the moment. So if a whole crew of men arrive and you hear a shout from downstairs and it's banging and crashing, I do apologize. So in Nevi'us prophecy, God only speaks to people who are incredibly wise. A Gibor b'midos is somebody who is in total command of his character traits or her character traits. Below Yitzrim is Gaber love b'dover ba'olam elohum is Gaber b'data al Yitzr Talmid. And when your Yitzhahara tries to get you to do something bad or to omit doing something good, then you fight back and you always beat your Yitzhahara. I wish I was that sort of person. You've got to be somebody who has worked to achieve that. Baal de Rechava, somebody of great knowledge, not just wisdom, but knowledge. Which is real knowledge and true knowledge. Somebody has got all these factors. Shona Begufine is physically perfect. She calls the pilots when he starts to study the mystical sides of the Torah. And delves deeply into the most profound and esoteric ideas, then it might be, he says, that HaShem will speak to them. That is the process of becoming a prophet. So therefore, Avraham Avinu, now at the age of, 70s, and he's 70s, Avraham Avinu, what came before the 70s when he reached his 8th decade? That is something which, a question which intrigues, where have I put it? I should have this here somewhere. Yes, over here. Rav Simcha Zissel. Rav Simcha Zissel was the founder of the Yeshiva of Kelm. And let me read a little bit to you. This is not on the screen. We'll get to the screen shortly. Get to share a little bit without screen sharing yet. So he says the following thing. He says, Nicholi Masha Hayakasha Yarbe. I want to explain to you something which troubled me enormously and a great deal up till now. Madua Lo Niska Maisa or Casting Shamosa Atzma Lamisa Medata Vasikli. The story of Avraham Avinu that I mentioned to before, there's a hint of something called Ur-casting at the end of Parshas Noach. But what really happened then? So let me give you a brief introduction to Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu, please bear in mind, lived in a totally different world from the world that you and I exist. It's a world, again, and I'm really being quite superficial here, but a world that had been united in one enormous empire under the leadership of an emperor called Nimrod. And Avraham Avinu goes on to challenge Nimrod's rule and his philosophy, if you call it that, his theology certainly, and as a consequence, he's going to be burned alive. But going further back, when Avraham Avinu is about to be born, then the magicians, astrologers of Nimrod, who certainly had powers, the same way as the astrologers of Pharaoh were able to anticipate and see the birth of a boy who was going to save the Jews, Nimrod's astrologers were able to see the birth of a boy who was going to challenge his authority. And before Pharaoh came up with the plan to kill all the male children and cancel that possible fate and future, then it's already been a path which had been trodden by Nimrod, who made the law that all boys would be killed at birth to stamp out this threat. Now, one of his greatest counselors, one of the people high up in Nimrod's government, was a fellow called Terach, the father of Avraham. Avram's mother was pregnant and gave birth to Avraham. When the soldiers arrived to take the baby who was going to be killed, because of the Hebrew word is protexia, because of his status, he was able to negotiate 3 days where his child or his wife would be able to have her child and only then be taken. Meanwhile, one of the maids in his house had given birth to a child, and when they came to collect his wife's child, he supplied that other child, who was taken to Nimrod, who grabbed the child by the ankles, according to the Medrash, smashed his head on the ground, spilling his brains on the floor. Sorry, that's a bit ghastly, but never mind. Anyway, what happens next? So the astonishing thing is that Avraham Avinu's mother, and it's considered to be a segula, to have some sort of spiritual positive force to say her name, which was Amislai Bas Carnival. Amislai Bas Carnival takes her son and a wet nurse and hides him in a cave and keeps him there until the entirety of the decree becomes null and void over time. Only then can Avram escape or be brought out of the cave. There is many arguments as to how old he was at this point, but when he comes, he's certainly either 3 or 4. So I think an opinion says 6, but there are various opinions. But certainly, from 0 to 6, something around within those parameters. And he comes into the world, and he looks at the world, and he sees it for the first time. Of course, you and I grew up with the world, so everything we see, we take for granted. But he'd never seen it before. A very profound idea. He looks and he sees the world, and he thinks, I wonder who made this. How did this come about? Now, if that strikes you strange for a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old to be thinking such things, all I can tell you is I agree with you, because I, and don't be insulted, but probably you are not a genius, but Avraham was. And geniuses think and see things totally different to normal human beings like Y.Y. Rubinstein. And that is the reason that he's thinking these things when he's 4 or 6. I was kicking a football when I was that age and thinking about nothing really. But he was thinking how the world works. I heard once of a child, somebody I know, who told, whose mother said that at the age of 4, he wanted to know where the water went when he turned on the tap. I mean, I knew where it went when I was 4, down the plug hole. No, he wanted to know where it went. You had to show him the pipes and all that sort of thing. There are some very interesting children. How old was Mozart when he wrote his first symphony? Was it 6 or 4? That's the age. Yeah, different sort of people. And apparently, according to a sefer called Chovos Levovos, he came to the following thought process. There are 2 possibilities. The world made itself, or somebody made it. Let's examine the first possibility in order. It made itself. And then you'd have to ask yourself the question, how does nothing make something? So that can't be right. So you would have to say, therefore, that somebody made it. And therefore, there is a creator of this world. What did he create it for? And that led him on a journey, because his mother takes him out from this cave at this point, and sends him to the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. And this is an interesting idea. No Jewish parent in the history that I'm aware of has ever sent their child, I should say religious Jewish parent, has ever sent their child to a school without wanting to find the very best school. Actually, maybe it's a general Jewish thing. You want to send your child to the very best place. And to send your child to the very best place requires doing investigation. So if you've got a child with a tremendous mathematical gift or a tremendous musical gift like Mendelssohn, it would make sense to send your gifted child to a musical school or a mathematical school or a mathematically based school. Why did she send her child to yeshiva, to the yeshiva of Shem and Aver? Because Amos Bas Carnival, and along the female line, uninterrupted, 10 generations from Adam to Noah, 10 generations from Noah to Avraham, there was never lost belief and knowledge of God. Avraham discovered it for himself, but to take that natural gift, that natural discovery, and to polish it, and to know exactly what to do with it, he had to have teachers. So he goes to the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. That takes him, therefore, much later on in life, and now we're talking, again, there's the debate about this, but around in his 40s, when the famous incident when he smashes the idols in his father's shop, store, however this worked. His father was in charge of idol production, and challenges his father's belief in idols and other gods, claiming there's only one God. His father denounces him to the king. He's brought before the king, and Nimrod says to him, what's this heresy you're saying that there are no gods? And he said, no, there are no gods. He said, there are no gods, a dangerous thing to say when Nimrod claimed himself to be a god. He said, no, there are no gods. And I can prove it to you. If you're a god, what am I thinking just now? And of course, Nimrod had nothing to say. This is embarrassing to all the people in the palace who are listening to this. If you're a god, said Avraham, why weren't you able to stop your own father's assassination? And so Nimrod said, okay, we'll see what you think about this when you get time to think about it. And he was stuck into a dungeon for 10 years. Here's an interesting piece of background. The Talmud and the Medrash reports about Avraham Avinu. He was incarcerated in a dungeon in darkness for 10 years. At the end of the 10 years, he's brought out back in front of the king. And the king said, oh yes, you're the Jew. You're the Jew boy who said that I'm not a god. What do you think now, Jew boy? I think we can easily imagine that Avraham was a starved skeleton of a person, and probably Nimrod has eaten quite a few meals and has put on weight. And Avraham says, no, you're not a god. He would not back down. That's a very important Jewish value and character trait to possess. And Nimrod lost his temper. See, he really wanted Avram to concede. He wanted Avram to retreat, and all opposition is gone. He said, oh, I'll show you the power of the gods. Because 3 days from now, you're going to be taken and burned alive by fire, and fire is one of the gods. Avram was taken to the town square, reports the Medrash, put into a stocks, this wooden thing with the 3 holes. And people were invited to bring bundles of wood to burn this heretic. His mother, Alice Leibat's Carnival, came and begged him to recant so that his life would be saved, and he refused. Eventually, he was taken to Ur-Kasdim and thrown into the furnace. And you can imagine the guards outside waiting to hear the blood-curdling screams of somebody being burned alive. But there were no blood-curdling screams. And the king and all his entourage are there witnessing the execution, which turned out not to be an execution. When they opened the door, Avram standing in the middle of the flames, saying, "Can I go now? I've got an appointment rather late for an appointment later today." I made that bit up, but you get the idea. And that is the story of Avraham Avinu, or part of the beginning of Avraham Avinu. So with that, I can return to what Simcha Zissel says. And he says, I've always had difficulty, this astonishing story about Avraham Avinu that we've just discussed. Why is that story not recorded openly and clearly in the Torah? After all, he says, it seems he was the first human being to give up his life, or willing to give up his life for God. Surely this is a much greater test than the test of being told to take your son and burn him alive, cut his throat and burn his body to a crisp. Not easy, understatement. On the other hand, you are being commanded by God, but God hasn't spoken to him yet. God speaks to him in Lecho. He's not spoken to him yet. How could such a thing occur? So here, if I jump a paragraph, then he says the following thing. He says, Indeed, this seems to be a greater test than the Akedah Yitzchak. Nobody told him to do it. And yet, Akedah Yitzchak has a whole parsha, a whole part of the Torah dedicated to the narrative and to recounting the story of what happened at Akedah Yitzchak. Why is it this explicitly in the Torah? Not implicitly, explicitly. The call of Gvoras and Ifloas and Philosoph and Iflazu, and this incredible outcome and willingness to give up your life because you'd philosophically arrived, even as a child, at the conclusion there must be a God who's created the world for a purpose, and I give up my life for that belief. Lo bo b'Torah b'remes Ur-Kasdim. It's only a hint. 2 words in the Torah. They were in a place called Ur-Kasdim. That's it. Vanirali, says Rav Simcha Zissel. Because that was the conclusion that Avraham Avinu reached before the level of Torah. It was a conclusion that he reached through his own seichel, his own intellect. And that is pre-Torah. That's the building of, as we said before, as the Rambam said, there are certain basic ingredients that a person has to have in their life, in their personality, or to have created them in order for prophecy, God speaking to you, to occur. This is pre-Torah. The incident of Ur-Kasdim is pre-Torah. That's what he achieved, was the outcome, that was the conclusion of his intellectual achievement. But Torah is above a human intellect. So it's not in the Torah except as a hint, because it's pre-Torah. It's the foundation that a human being has to build to now step up to something way, way beyond the intellectual achievements of a human being. And that's why he says, Lo bo b'Torah rak b'remes Ur-Kasdim. Nearly, it seems to me, says Reb Simcha Zissel, Dov nifla, an astonishing thing. Ki Torah lo bo rak l'mala me'aseichel. Because the Torah starts where human intellect stops. But kol hamechin atzma v'kol avashi yochel. And anybody who prepares himself an intellectual apprenticeship, to try to achieve as much as he can. Now you've just prepared yourself for what comes next, something much greater than human intellect, the Torah. Much more than your intellect can achieve. As bo l'klal Torah, then you can come to the Torah. And that's what happened to Avram, and now God speaks to him. 70 years, and then God speaks to him. Okay, now with that, we can now start to share our screen and what the Alshich has to say in this. I suppose I should really get as actually, think it says it in our share screen rather than we look at the Chumash. I think the psukim that we need are actually there. So let me just check. So if I share my screen as we normally do, and I go over here, waiting for this. Oh, here's the moment. Right. Okay, I didn't put this up. Oh, that's a bit of a pity. Right. It says, now I have to show off. So the first pasuk, and I have it in front of me as well, which makes life easy. I will read to you. It says the following: V'yomer HaShem el Avraham, and Hashem speaks to Avraham and says, Lech Lecho, me'artzecha, from your land, m'oladecha, the place of your birth, me'beis avicha, and from your father's house, el ha'aretz asher arecha, to the land which I will show you. That's what the pasuk says here, and that's really what we have to consider. So, on that basis, in fact, you know what I can do? I can hold it up, and if you want, you can take a screenshot, because you can pause this. So there you go. It's there. I'm going to take a screenshot of that. There we go. Good. Right. So again, V'yom Hashem Avram. Hashem speaks to Avram, Lech Lecho. Now, the questions the Alshich wants to ask, let's look at this pasuk again and analyze it through the eyes of the Alshich. Question number one, Labal B'Yar Mikras, to understand these pasukim and what the story really is all about, we should nosim lev, it's appropriate to consider why Omro V'Yom Hashem, Kimina Roy Yom Tchil of Yira Lav Hashem. It says, what does it say? V'Yom Hashem, you should first tell us that Hashem appeared to him. Hashem appeared to him, and he said, this is the first time he's appeared to him. Question number one. Question number two, why is it Lech Lecho? Go for yourself. Just say go. Lech. We've only got 4 questions we're going to do. The Alshich has many more. Gimel. Omer be'artzecha. Go from your land, etc. Ki be'omer lech lecho el eretz asher arecha. Because when it says, as it goes on to say, go to the land which I show you, obviously you're leaving your land. Why does it have to therefore say go from your land? If you're going to, you're obviously going from. So all it has to say go to, and we would know go from. So why does it go from your land, the place of your birth, and your father's house? And then he says, interestingly, don't forget the answer to this one. The order is not right. It says, go from the land of your birth, and from your city, and from your father's house. The place you leave first is your home, if you're going on a journey. Then you'll leave the city that you're in, or the town that you're in, and then you'll leave your land. So it should say leave your father's house, and your city, and then your land, but it says your land, your city, and your father's house. Why is it the wrong way around? So the Alshich is going to give us 2 answers here. I'll share the screen here, and you can see it. And the first answer, we can divide into 2, the Alshich's explanation of these psukim, of the difficulties he's raised, takes us into 2 different worlds. One is the world of Musar and Hashkafa, Jewish philosophy and Jewish ethics. The other explanation, I'll show you that shortly, is the world of Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. But let's, if I make this a little bit bigger, might be a good idea so you can see it better, and enlarge my screen. Let's look at what, oh no, I don't need to enlarge it that way. That's really not good. Oh, the mouse, the Apple mouse. Right, okay, that works. Okay, so he says the following thing. The Alshich says, what Hashem is really saying to him when he says, Lech Lecho me'artzecha, leave your father, your land, your father's house, your city and your father's house, and go to the land which I will show you. He says there are 2 things going on here. Al-Achas. The first thing that he's saying to him is like this. Don't make yourself in any way connected to your father or subservient to him. I might actually start up here because it's this control has gone absolutely crazy. Yes, that's better. He says, Avram could easily conclude to himself like this. Mali Toiv Melizaka says Avi. What? Now that he's escaped from forecasting, now that he knows that God exists, now that he's proven God exists, God has spoken to him, what can be better than to stay and to influence my father? After all, charity begins at home. Surely the first person I should try and influence is my father. Ki achzerehu b'tshuva I'll make him into somebody who believes in God, recognizes God, and make him God-fearing and faithful servant of Hashem. And the beginning of the journey, which he's come with me to Ur-Kasdim, part of the ways, because they're going to the land of Israel, never quite got there, his father rather, to go there, surely I should finish the job that I started with my father. And I will stay attached to my father, he'll stay attached to me, and I'll finish the job of making him into a God-fearing man, or a God-recognizing man. Because Terach is 60 years after Avraham leaves him, so he could have spent those 60 years focused on his father. Okay, Kamaimar as well as the rabbis say, that says that Avraham, the Terach died before Avraham goes to the land of Israel. He didn't literally die, it was just he died spiritually because he hadn't bought Avram's package. The second point, he says, Janies, Avram Avinu, his purpose in life is to bring people close to God. So where are you going to succeed most? If I was to say to myself, where would I succeed most as a rabbi and as we're teaching Torah, influencing people? My first answer would be naturally Glasgow in Scotland, where I grew up. After all, I have, or at least had, a Glasgow accent. I understand the Glasgow accent. I understand the philosophy. Glasgow philosophy. The culture. What could be better than to stay in the place that I came from and working people there? So Abraham could say, I'll stay in the land that I come from, and then I will have maximum sense, maximum effect. It'd be much easier for me to make my fellow Glaswegians, or Avram's fellow countrymen, the place of my birth, into people who share my belief because they know me and I know them. Rather than other people, I don't even know their language, and if I do, I'll speak with an accent, they won't listen to me, etc. And obviously, it'd be much, much better than to choose the people in my own land to influence. I'll stay here. I'll stay with my father. I'll stay there. And that's why it says, no, leave your land, leave your city, and leave your father. Now, he says, now we'll go back to what we talked before. I'll echo the first idea that I'll stay with my father. No, don't make yourself subservient, a mere annex of your father. That you walk in his footsteps. And like you will go, you will follow after him. Make your own path. Go your own way. Interesting. Go your own way. It's interesting to think of this idea that when Avraham is told to go his own way, there is a famous Rabbi Dester, I'm sure we've talked about this before, that the Hebrew word for evil, I'll write this in this piece of paper here, or this envelope, the Hebrew word for evil is ra. Ra. There you go. You can see that? Ra. What's the opposite of ra? So, as I'm writing it, you hopefully will have given the correct answer. The opposite of ra in Hebrew is tov. But Rabbi Dessler says, no, the opposite of ra, resh ayin, is ayin resh. Resh ayin is ayin resh. And ayin resh means hisarus, comes from the root of the word hisarus, an awakening or a catalyst. And he asks the question, why in the Haggadah do we say that Mitchila, at the beginning, our forefathers were idolaters? Terach Avi Avram. Terach wasn't the forefather of the Jewish people. We start from Avram. Why do we go back to him? And the answer is because it's true, as we know statistically, that bullies were bullied and abusers were abused, and alcoholics and alcoholic parents, drug addicts produce drug addict children, etc., etc., etc. It doesn't have to be like that. The opposite of Ra is to go in the opposite direction. Avram could have followed after his father, making maybe tiny changes to his father's perspective on life. Or you can go your own way and go in the opposite direction. Resh ayin producing ayin resh. And that's what Hashem's saying to him here. Don't attach yourself to your father. Go from your father's house. Don't think that you are going to be an appendage of his. That's not going to work unless you don't even see why. Go and discover yourself. Go in the opposite direction. Alshich, and the second one, I'll stay and affect the people in my hometown because they understand me. No, go from your land and from the place of your birth. And your father's house. Because the people of your area, after over 7 decades, have paid no attention to you, made no effect. Now, when you moved to Haran, then you did affect people, but not in the land that you came from. No, I want you to go to the land which I'm going to show you. Yeah. So let's stop sharing that screen and let's talk about that. There's a very, very important idea here. Leave your land and don't try and affect the people in your land because it's been a failure for decade after decade after decade. One of my close friends is Rabbi David Gottlieb. He's a Boston Apostle, and the old Boston Rebbe once said to him, what right have you to go for the Shiur and the Shabbos? And Rabbi Gottlieb is one of the key figures of the Kiruv movement who influenced thousands and thousands of people for the zero background, including rabbis with his brilliant thoughts, including myself, showing tremendous insights. But once, he must have been in discussion with the Boston Rebbe about Kiruv Chakim. Of course, he still teaches Or Sameach these decades later. But the advice that he got from his Rebbe was, what right have you to go for the Shiur and the Shabbos? What right have you to go for the difficult, the hard cases? And Rabbi Gottlieb says that he imagines, to illustrate this point that his Rebbe was making, that one day you stand in the heavenly court and they say, who are you? And he says, my name is David Gottlieb. I used to be called Dale Gottlieb. I came from a Reform family. And one day I came face to face with the Boston Rebbe. I was impressed. It started me on a journey which ended up me becoming a religious Jew. The next bit of the story is not quite true, but you see it's nearly true. And he did go on to become a professor of philosophy at Johns Hopkins University. And so he imagines, he says, he imagines I spent my whole life there. He didn't, of course, went to Israel and became, a great teacher in Or Sameach. However, imagine he stayed his whole life teaching philosophy at Johns Hopkins. And he says, there was two Jewish professors in that university. And I argued and debated with them. One was a communist, one was an atheist, and we used to struggle on these topics for years, an argument, decade after decade. And I finally succeeded in convincing them that I was right. And I have these two other souls beside me. And HaShem's going to turn and say, yeah, pointing to another corner of the room, where there is 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 people, souls waiting there. And they say, but what about us? All the effort and all the work that you put into those two, you could have made all of us through. What right have you to go for the hard cases? And this concept, that teaching of the Boston Rebbe, says the Alshich, what HaShem was saying to Avraham Avinu. You tried for decades with these people with no success. Now is the time to go to a new land. And even though, logically speaking, you would imagine that the best success you could have is in your own land, where you understand the idioms and the culture and the history and the language and the slang and all the rest. No, you'll succeed better. Lech, Lecho. So go to discover yourself and also to discover how to influence other people properly. You have to sometimes leave your father's house, the place of your birth and your city. That's the ethical insight. Let's look a little bit beyond that. And if I share my screen again, and I hope I'm still sharing screens. Yes, I seem to be. I'm not sure if I'm sharing screen. Let's just say, yes, I wasn't. No, I am. Good. Right. So, and it says your screen is screen sharing. That's good. Good. Let's go into this in a little bit more depth. So he says, good. Omnam, if we're looking here at the spiritual point of view, there are four, which he's going to talk about, four aspects that you have to realize that Avraham is going to achieve by doing what God tells him to do and leave the land of Israel. And the four things are here. I'm assuming I've got the right place. Yeah, good, he says. And that is one. The first one is There is a difference. I'll read. If we go deeper into these words, Hashem comes to teach Avram, so that every Jew should know that the distinction difference between living as a Jew in the land of Israel or living outside it. Because the person might well say, there are four aspects to this question, and that is ha'odam atzmai. Is there any distinction between living in Israel and not, vis-a-vis the person himself? Ha'oretz halazu. Is there any difference in distinction between the land of Israel and any other land? Olam hagugalim. The world of astrology, where the planets have an effect on the life and the occurrences of a life, in a life, to a person, depending on where you live. We'll come back to that in an idea. Olam ha-rachoni asher alav, or the spiritual connection that a person has with God. Is it really geographically fixed and located, affected by where you live? The answer to all these four is yes. Well, let's look. So he says here, therefore, Behuki ala echod, when Hashem says, go away from the land that you are in now. Let's do the first one. The first one, if you remember before, maybe you see it over there, was it? What's the difference between the lands? One, what's the difference in the person himself? Behuki ala echod, does being in a different place affect you? What difference does it affect me? I live in Israel, I don't. It's still the same planet, same dirt, same stones. The second one, the person might think, he had some oretz. So if the first one, I won't be a different person wherever I am. It's the same me. Two, the land itself. Are you telling me the land's different? Go for it's all the same planet. Third difference. And again, I said we were going to be seeing the depth of Avraham. There's a Gemara in Shabbos in Kufnin Vov. The Gemara famously discusses there whether or not Jews are affected by mazel. Are we affected by mazel? The mazolas, which are the planets and the stars, which the Rambam says were created in order to affect events on this planet. And your mazel is your intellect. Were you born clever, like myself, average, or not so clever? Were you born healthy? And all the factors that go up to make your life, those are going to be affected by the mazolas. Now that's a given in Judaism. The question is, are Jews affected by mazel? Non-Jews as well, I suppose. That's being discussed in the Gemara in Kufna and Vov. And there it comes to the conclusion, yes, mazel does affect us. So that means to say that there is a difference in the lands where you are. It's going to affect you differently. There's a very famous Jewish concept discussed in the Talmud. If something goes very tragically and dramatically wrong in your life, shina moko, shina mazel. If you change your location, you'll often change your mazel, the things that happen to you in your life. So here, the word mazel we take to mean figuratively, as in the Yiddish phrase, mazel tov, etc. A mazel dekashah should be in a good time. But it actually means astrologically. You'll change the mazel, you'll change the effect that the heavens have on you as an individual. After all, planets do affect things that go on in this world, like the moon affects the tides. It would not be such a surprise to say that the planets affect things in other ways as well. I think it's a phone ring.
Call from our jumping.
Oh, I can't speak to them. Sorry, can't speak. Good. Where else are we up to? I'm ringing. Go away. At least it shows that it's real live. That's how you switch off. Good. Anything else? Oh, yes. And the other one is, so the Galgalim, the astrological forces do affect you. And the fourth one is, Gamu Omar Yomer, is there a distinction between the lands of Israel and other lands? The answer is yes. So let's read just a little bit here, and then we'll come and we'll answer all these in order. Okay, I'll call Avraham. These 4 questions that apply to Avraham Avinu and us. Then, therefore, Hashem comes to teach Avram and as a consequence teach us as well. Das lahamid al arba al emes, to answer and give us a perspective, a true perspective, and what the answer is to these 4 questions. So the first thing is to say Lech Lecho. The first thing was, am I a different person here than I would be in a different place? The answer is yes. Lech Lecho, to find the real you, or to find the greatest you that you could possibly be. Sometimes you have to move. Now let's jump up here, a little arrow, and it takes me up to there. So I missed out a bit here. The answer, he says, is like this. The land of Israel is, we said, God made the whole world. Surely all the planets, the same basic stuff. Their answer is no. Kabbalistically, God started with the land of Israel. In fact, he started with Jerusalem. In fact, he started with Har HaBayis, where the temple stands. The place where the temple stands is where heaven and earth kiss, touch. And that is the holiest place on earth. And we remain attached. There's a soul of every Jew, and the soul of every Jew remains attached to its source, and that's in heaven. So the place, imagine if you've ever seen those people, deep sea divers, they have these big brass helmets, and they walk on the sea floor, and they've got pipes. People are pumping air down to them. Well, if the place where the easiest flow of air would come if it's in a direct line, if the ship's above and they're pumping air and there's a direct line to the fellow on the seabed, fine. But if, as it were, he moves, and if they're like a hose pipe in a garden, there's a kink, there's a little bend in the hose, that will stop that air getting to him. Spiritually, the place we're more directly connected to heaven is Jerusalem. The further away we are, the more chance the hoses of being twisted. That's exactly what Hashem is telling Avram. Leave and go to the land of Israel. That's where you're going to perfect yourself. That's where you're going to achieve the ultimate greatness that Jew can, because that's the source where you're most directly connected to heaven. And that's why he says here, to the land of Israel, because it's directly in opposite parallels heaven. Dova B'Shorasa, then you're going to be most clearly connected to spiritual air. Ki Avir Eretz Yisrael, gosh, I've forgotten to use that. The air of the land of Israel, Kodashim. It's particularly holy. And now we see why. V'yimshach boy derech Yishar, and it comes straight from heaven. Echas shorish nasha el nasha Hashem hakirboy. From the source of your soul, which is still connected to your soul, right back to its source. Nimsa ki shalom yikra b'li per de menia bay. Whether any twists in the pipe. Now let's jump down to here. So let's go. Ki halo zeh me'amar yizbarach el Avram. That's what Avram's telling Avram. Hashem's telling Avram. Al yalarucha. Don't think ki muhusa b'chutz la'oretz b'chutz be'eretz akasi. That the land that you have, the existence, what you've achieved and what you could achieve outside Israel is the same as what you can achieve inside Israel. Not true. You should know that you're innately not succeeding, not breathing air, spiritual air as clearly outside the land of Israel as you can and will do inside. This is how you're cut off from your source. Because you're cut off from your source. Then when Lech Lecho, when you go to your source, that is then you'll be reconnecting with the source of your soul. You'll be reconnecting with you, the bit of you that's in heaven, the best bit of you. That's why it says Lech Lecho. Go and discover yourself. Really, yourself means in heaven. Because your whole being will be perfected by that. So will I be affected? Our first question was, will I be affected differently if I live in Scotland, I live in South Africa, I live in Australia? Yes, you will. The place where a person, a Jew, is most likely to succeed spiritually is in the land of Israel. The second point he raised, remember our second point was up there, it's in the land itself. Is the land of Israel different? And it says, leave your land. Why does it say it that way? You think that it's all the same, every country? No. And it doesn't matter where you are, it's all the same thing. No, Avraham Avinu, and no, his children, Jewish people. That's not so. If you leave the land that you're in, you're literally, it's as though you're going into a different place, to a different planet. There's a different dimension is available to access in the land of Israel than anywhere else on the planet. Magam, the Rabbi Seinazal, and certainly the rabbis who say this, we now go up to a different page. Here we go. I'll bring this forward. Stretch it a bit. Oops. Stretch it a bit. Yes, that worked. Make it a bit broader. And they say, as I said before, HaShem created the world first from the land of Israel, and the rest of the world. So the prototype, the spiritual prototype is the land of Israel, and everything else is, there is a difference. No matter how beautiful Switzerland or Italy is, and Scotland, then it's still nothing compared to Israel. But it's not talking about physical beauty. Compare these beautiful countries to Israel. They're more dramatic. I'm not talking about that sort of beauty, we're talking about spiritual beauty. The third thing, Alshich is and we talked about, are we affected by the mazalas negatively from one place to the other? I already told you that. Yes, you are. That's what it says here. From the place you were born, Avraham Avinu, where you could not have any children, and your wife could not have any children, that Shina Mokum, Shina Mazel, that Mazel will change. The effect will change when you leave. Because you're born in Chutz La'aretz. That's where you got to leave. Because what was geyser, what was fated or stated to be your life, and the things that would occur in your life in Chutz La'aretz, outside Israel, it's different if you move to Israel. There you will have children, which of course is what it goes on to say. That will be as though you were leaving the fate which was determined by the different planetary forces, because you go into a completely new land, and their power doesn't they have no writ there. The place of your birth. And the fourth point was from your father's house. Now he says a very interesting thing. What does it mean, leave your father's house? Because your real house is not in this world at all, Kabbalistically. You're only a tourist, a visitor. You're passing through. The real house, the place you really belong, is in heaven. You are like a sojourner, like a stranger or a guest, not alone. You're just sleeping overnight for a little while, 70 years or 80 years. It's as though you're, sorry, I think I missed that line. Yeah, alone, but and it's just, I'll go in a second. Yom of Ketzel Ka'ibra, in a second you'll be out of here and where you really belong. Achabayas Hamiti, the real place where you belong, Hulamala. That's in heaven, as it says in Kailas, Yeholacha Adam El Beis Alama. There's the idea, because you've got to go to your real house, and that's upstairs. So leave your father's house. Leave this world. Be focused on a totally different set of criteria. El Shiesh Hefresh, there's a difference. Ki Beis Alama Shalish. Yisrael Hu Tachas Kanfi Ashkin. The real house that a Jew should focus on is the place where he's connected to his father, his real father, that's HaShem. Gishon Beis Has's house. A Beis Kol Yeseh B'nei Noach. Whereas the rest of the world, that won't affect. You don't have that closeness. Those are the four things. So all these four mystical ideas, and certainly the ethical idea, you can achieve all of those, Avram, if you leave and go to the land of Israel. The astonishing thing is the last idea I just want to tell you. And that Hashem says, and if you leave and do all this, then you will have children. You'll be a blessing. It's not a reward, it's a reality. Everything that you could be is going to be maximized there. But if you make yourself Avraham Avinu, or you make yourself, I mean, this is Avram's first test, right? Suppose you couldn't have any children, and Avram couldn't have any children. And suppose, you want to have a nice, comfortable lifestyle, and you want to succeed. You want to maximize who you could be. In fact, as I'm sure I've told you before, when I sign copies of my books, I often give the best blessing that I can. And when I say, and I write in the book, you should have a life of achievement. Because when you've achieved, you feel good about yourself. And when you haven't achieved, you feel frustrated about yourself. Well, Avraham Avinu has been promised that if you go to the land of Israel, you will achieve everything you could achieve. You'll maximize the person you could become. No regrets, because you made a great life. Why is that a test? If I told you if you come back and join this sharing next week, I'm going to send you $16 million and a Tesla. And that illness you've been suffering from, that will go. And all the pain in your life, that will go. You'll have tremendous pride in your children who will be very successful. Would you come? Yeah. So why is that a test? Well, the pasuk is going to say that Abraham went kasher diber alav HaShem, because God told him to do it, even though everything that he could possibly want in life is going to be maximized for the reasons we've said here. The land is different. You're going to be different. The mazalas won't be able to affect you. You're going to have a huge effect on the world. That's not why he went. Because God told him to do it. Could you totally cancel out everything you've ever wanted and only do something if God wanted you to do it? Abraham could. But that's why he became the father of the Jewish people. We'll see more about him next week. I wish you all an extremely good Shabbos. Good Shabbos.